Tax and accounting happens whether you're making money or not.
Making a big change to new software makes a big difference.
I think you're absolutely right about dealing with forced change.
But there is actually probably thousands of legal billing software out there or practice management. It's very confusing. We get them using that and they're blown away because it saves the firm a lot of time. And then that upfront money you had to pay to train and get it all set up is easily paid for by the time savings and the accuracy. Accuracy is huge. It's why we want the technology. It's why we want the software.
What does the impact of that virtual firm look like on a technology engagement?
You've got security protocol in place. In the world we live in, I think it's going to just get more important as we go down the road.
Yeah, I remember those days, and it's gotten to be so much cleaner with modern tools.
If there was a security breach or if there was a hack, how do you protect all the client data?
Specialization isn't narrowing. Specialization is just getting deeper. Welcome to the CPA Transformation Podcast, where innovation meets insight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Cronin, Chief Strategy Officer at Zenwork. Join me as we consider the forces revolutionizing the world of accountants, bookkeepers, and professional tax preparers. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions and invaluable insights brought to you by tax1099.com. To watch and listen to more episodes of the CPA Transformation Podcast, visit cpatransformation.com, or you can visit our YouTube channel at tax1099. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello, and welcome to the CPA Transformation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cronin, I'm your host, and with me today is Linda Artesani. She's from Artesani Accounting, which is an accounting services firm that's designed for the legal industry. She's the author of the book, Modernize Your Law Firm, Transform Your Law Firm for the Future, which is available on Amazon. And Linda, thanks for coming. Give us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me. Well, I've been doing this work, accounting work, for 25 years this year, which is a pretty big milestone. I actually was a generalist for a long time, and then around 2016, I got the bug in me from going to QuickBooks Connect that maybe I should start to specialize my firm. Kind of got a little hook of it because I was reading so many things about, you can make more money but do the same work. And I'm glad I did when I did, because now, of course, we've got artificial intelligence and all the things coming down the pike and technology. So I want to be in a place where I can have more brain work and be more involved in that. So that's kind of where I led myself down to working with attorneys, and it's a great job.
So I guess that sort of leads into my first question, right? Is there a unique thing about working with attorneys that really attracted you? What's that connection between accounting and law firms that really drove you to pick that vertical? You could have picked you could have picked fast food franchisees, right? You could pick anything.
I could have, and I actually methodically thought through it. I was in a mastermind group with Seth David called 97 and Up, and he was like my coach, he was my coach, and I actually knew I wanted to specialize but didn't have a clue of what industry, and I kind of exported all my data out into a spreadsheet and sorted it and categorized it by the vertical, and then I gave him a rating of who I'd want to answer the phone. So if somebody called, and that is kind of specific to the person sometimes, but I think for me it was professionalism. Attorneys too, if you ask them for documents, they know the pain of not getting them, so they truly will get you the documents back right away, which was a pain point with like a contractor. And then also I thought about the economy when it came to contractors. Although I love working with them, I found that with the economy, it can be very flux. And I didn't want to put myself in a place where if the economy's down, I'm losing clients, which I had gone through a couple of times over my career. And I just thought with attorneys and law firms, there would be a little bit more brain work. I'd be talking to a professional, and I would be able to have a higher level conversation sometimes. I wouldn't have to be explaining some things that I would have to with other industries. So it's kind of where I landed. And I really, really, really liked the attorney that I worked with. I had one attorney client when I went down the road of specialization with attorneys. So you don't have to have a lot of them. We even have some people in our law lab. We have a group that we have a mastermind group. Now I'm the coach for other people. And they also, I have some that have none, but they want to go into that industry. So they're in the group to learn about it, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that, it's really interesting, and it's a good observation to target, sort of recession resilient industries.
Yeah.
We don't think about the fact that we're lucky that largely we are recession resilient as a community, but because tax and accounting happens whether you're making money or not, um, and so that's a really great insight for people looking. So when they're shopping for, if they're looking to try to mirror some of your success, shopping for an industry that has some resilience, that doesn't suffer ups and downs, as you mentioned, like building, contracting, construction in general has probably got to be that way.
Yeah, and with attorneys too, they actually some of the practice areas do better when the economy goes down, which, like, oddly enough, personal injury. I
Sure.
guess people fall more when the economy is off, and it's kind of interesting. But that's one of the things I've observed over doing all the different practice areas, and it's true that they are really recession proof, fortunately for us. So that's a definite bonus.
That's great. That's great. That's very interesting. Counter cyclical businesses are also, I guess, that's also an interesting thing that I just never really thought about. So let's talk a little bit about working with technology and accounting and law firms, right? So maybe a little bit of background about when you first started engaging with them, or maybe even there's probably some automation going on before you got there, but when you first started engaging, what did you find about the history of how their workflows were managed?
With law firms, still find this, so it's not something that happened 5 or 6 years ago. It's actually still there. I still run into the attorney that's actually running a pretty good sized firm, and I'll say, "Where do you keep your trust accounting?" And they say, "Oh, I've got this spreadsheet over here." And I'm like, and that's when they usually call us, because it becomes unmanageable. And then when we get our hands on it, we find out, well, they didn't really put the right formulas in, so they're kind of, it doesn't really add up. Right. And then, we want to get them into software because it just makes life easier. And it's part of it is taking time. So you probably know, when you start to work with software, there's a learning curve and there's a cost to it. There's always a cost to changing software or implementing any. And it's time well spent, but sometimes you sit back going, I just don't have to. I just think about any time Intuit changes something on QuickBooks, and
Yeah.
you kind of toggle that switch off because you're like, oh, I don't have time to do that. I'm going to put it back to what it was. And eventually the switch goes away and you have to learn whatever they've changed. So it's the same thing. Making a big change to new software makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Amusingly enough, right? So here I'm got my QuickBooks
Yeah.
from QuickBooks Connect 2 years ago, and that's I think you're absolutely right about dealing with forced change. Being a software provider, I'll go ahead and mea culpa for my industry, right? We do have a tendency to force change on people over time for our own economic reasons,
Right.
and it's not that there's no reason for it, but they are our reasons and not often enough yours. So I think that's a great point about forced change driving increasing the duration of any adoption process and the expense associated with that. When you talk about adoption, when you look at either something like QuickBooks Online, I guess the whole switch from desktop to online has been a huge thing going on 10 years almost now.
I know. It's hard to believe.
When you think about looking at, looking at software that's either in the cloud or software that's on premise, how do you think about that split in tech stack as specifically in the context of legal, but maybe, and obviously the more general observations would be interesting for our community too.
Yeah, what we see, so I'm a big believer of, like, log in, do it. You can do it from anywhere, and we don't do any desktop clients. I think I have one desktop client still left in Florida. That's not law firm related. It was my first Florida client, so I've kept her. And I think she's going to retire very shortly. But other than that, we don't take anybody in with desktop unless they're converting to online. Usually what we see in the law firms, though, is you'll see them in a product, I'm just going to say time slips because that's one of the popular ones.
Sure.
It's a desktop product, but they're using QuickBooks Online over here, and they're using desktop product for their billing part here, and then they're either journaling in the total of the sales from the desktop product, or they're just downloading the bank feeds and hoping and praying that everything that came through for a deposit is legal income, which typically it's not. And that's what we generally see. So we try to get them maybe out of that, put them into Clio or Lean Law, and then we connect the software so both software work really well together, and then it's all one seamless unit. And I think that it's funny when they get into it. If you've ever seen time slips, it reminds me of One Right Plus back in 19.
There, that takes us back. Yeah.
It looks just like, see, they're old enough to know what that looks like, and it's like, oh my goodness. And it's 8,000 clicks. I mean, we try to get rid of the clicks, and it's a lot of clicks to get to one place. But the problem is the person in the office knows how to do it. And then when you bring them into that new ecosphere, they're looking at it and they're overthinking it typically. And then if they're not overthinking it, a lot of times, sometimes they take right to it. It's kind of interesting. I tell them not to think too hard about it. It's very logical software workflow. We make a lot of little videos for them so they can kind of follow along. I have videos on QuickBooks that we get as a pro advisor, but I also have videos on the different software so that way they can learn on the fly. I've found over all the years of training, because I've been training in QuickBooks for a lot of years, that shorter spurts of training, like don't teach them the whole thing, teach them this is how you apply trust to bills, and try to put the pieces in so that the whole picture is there, but they've got the pieces, so if they forgot how to do a part of it, they don't have to go watch a whole video. They can watch a 5-minute video instead of a 30-minute video. And I find I have more success. I think the brain, it sticks more in the brain that way.
Oh yeah, especially in today's world where every time when I need to do anything, the first thing I do is go look for a YouTube video to walk me through it.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's a great strategy you're talking about there. So when you talk about moving people to more modern software, moving from a legacy time tracking to something a little bit more modern, how does that really impact a firm, right? I mean, if you think about how do you one of the things you talk about in your book is how outdated software actually is damaging the firm. How do you help people quantify or understand that at something a little bit less than the sort of seems reasonable, sort of a more concrete level?
There's always a cost involved, but the people coming to us know that there's going to be a cost involved. Typically, when a client comes to us, we sit and we like to work with the mid-market space. So they'll come to us and they may have had a set amount of partners, and then maybe a couple have aged out of the firm, they've retired or they've become of counsel, and then all of a sudden you've got the 40 to 45-year-old coming in being a partner. And they don't understand why they can't look up a balance on their phone. Yeah. To them, that seems foreign. And they'll start the conversation rolling where they want to automate things and get things moving along. So they don't want to have to call the office to find out what the balance on an invoice is if they're in court. So that will usually trigger a start of it. And then they'll do their research. And then if they land it with talking to either me or Sarah at our firm, they'll ask us questions about the different software. There is actually probably thousands of legal billing software out there or practice management. It's very confusing. At one point when I was doing my blog posting, I decided I was going to go down the road of reviewing all of them. And I quickly realized there was way too many to be able to review, and some didn't have like a trial. So I stuck to the big ones, but I know that talking to us, they could hear from what it feels like from our perspective. Because I never thought in my years of doing this work that we would be the one they called to ask about what should I be using to protect my firm with email. We get asked the craziest questions where I never thought that we'd be the tech person or the advisor on some of the stuff that we're advising on, but they're who we call because they look at us as a tech-forward firm, which is it's very humbling. It's very flattering to have somebody think that way about us. They might come to us and say, have you heard about, and a lot of times we're teaching people too about things in their own software. They may have already been in Clio, but they weren't using Clio to the fullest extent. And there's a lot of things inside that program in particular, because it's got a lot of features to it, that they can templatize a lot of things and save time. I know even using Lean Law, we were able to go in and say, I'm noticing as I'm setting your firm up that you've got use a lot of the same language on the invoices, but they were typing it all out, and there's all these shortcuts that you could put in place that you can get that out, and it's going to look like a unified firm. Why wouldn't you want to use those short codes? And we get them using that, and they're blown away because it saves the firm a lot of time. And then that upfront money you had to pay to train and get it all set up is easily paid for by the time savings and the accuracy. That's the big thing, is accuracy is huge. It's why we want the technology. It's why we want the software. So that's typically what we see. And we usually have, I have to say that most clients are really happy. I try to judge the room and go, who's going to be the one that's going to be the problem child? And you're in a meeting, you see them with their arms folded. You're like, okay, that's the one I need to really work on. And sometimes I'll look at the crowd and I'll think, okay, when I'm doing the training, I'm looking at someone that may be my age, maybe a little bit younger, like 50s or 60s, and I'm thinking that's probably going to be the person that's going to have a harder time. They've been at the firm for 30 years or whatever. And sometimes they take to the software and they're training the younger people in the firm, and I'm like, wow, I kind of thought they would know how to do it. So you can't label people when you're starting to train. It's always eye-opening when you see who's taking to it and who's really adapting well to it. That's the fun part of the job.
Yeah, that sounds like it was a lot of fun. It's interesting that you bring up, going into places where they've got like a Clio that they purchased, but really they haven't optimized its use, right? I mean, there's when you look at, from our standpoint, in the accounting community, it's an opportunity for advisory work, right? To go in and say, hey, how do we add value to your firm that's not tax, right, or not something transactional and very relatively straightforward. So I think that's a great idea to talk to your customers about, where they are with their tech stack. Do you do an organized inventory when you engage, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, we try to take a look at what they're using overall in their firm for all the pieces. And some of the pieces have nothing to do with the accounting side of it. It might be something to do with just their practice area. We try to look at it. We try to do some research to see what would work better. If it's not something that's working, ask them. Just ask them, like, what do they like about the software? I mean, and I always tell them there's no perfect software. None of them are perfect unless you built it yourself. None of them are perfect. And there's give and take, and there's workarounds that we can get involved in with some workarounds with you and kind of build out what you need. A lot of times they come from one software and they want it to look exactly like the old software. And that's another thing that will not happen. You have to understand. But sometimes we can customize it with a custom field. So sometimes we're able to make it have that look, but then you just ask the questions like, and why do you need this exactly? What does it do for your firm? And then when you find that out, you can kind of gauge if they really need it, if it's necessary. Sometimes it's like their binky, you have to put it in, and eventually you realize that they're not using it at all, but they thought they needed it. So sometimes you have to do that. And it's part of doing the work. Also, when you're moving someone into new software, if it's an existing firm that's been around for 30 years, and you need to move all the data over, do you really need to bring all the data back from 30 years ago? How much do you want to bring in? Because you don't want to bog the system down. And a lot of these products, if you get really a lot of data in there, it can slow the software down. So you have to know that you might see that slowing down, and you might want to let them know that you still can have access to the old software. So when you make that transition, that line in the sand, we like to call it, you still can go back into the old software and see what was there if you need to go back. If you're starting fresh with like fresh chart of accounts, cleaning up the chart of accounts is always a big one because there may be some legacy things in there that you no longer need. So it's a great time to refresh and kind of update everything when you do make the switch. It's a really good time to do that.
No, that's a good observation. If you look at the tech stack inventory, and then also it's an opportunity to look at the connectors and integrations that may have happened. Yes. Right. A lot of times you bought something 5 years ago and there was no existing integration to QuickBooks Online, and it's now there.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a big opportunity that a lot of people would actually miss. When you talk about that tech stack, so, I guess maybe a little bit about virtual firms, like for people, everybody went to work from home. Most of us, you and I are both working from our homes right now. What does the impact of that virtual firm look like on a technology engagement?
One of the major things you have to look at too, if it's fully remote, and we do see this with some law firms, I always say they're kind of like a hair salon. Some of them, they all kind of have their home office, and then they collectively pay for a little small space that they can go meet a client at. Yeah. Or have a conference room, or they'll rent a conference room. It's interesting how they can collaborate with other attorneys and combine their practices and make a flourishing firm out of everybody's kind of working from different places. I've even seen it across states where people are doing it in different states, which is really fascinating. But I think the biggest part of the virtual part of it is you got to make sure you have good software, a good internet connection, right? You need to have all of that. You can't be out in a place where you're having trouble with that, especially if you're switching to online. But I think what you need to make sure is it's streamlined and everybody's on the same page too. the same software. Everybody's using the same. Everything's set up properly, like you are one cohesive unit. I think that's the biggest part of it. It can kind of be challenging sometimes, but if you get everybody on board and all in the same room and kind of work through it, you can get to that place where everybody's using the same pieces to make it work. And with like a Clio, you've got a practice management tool. Everything is inside of it, which is really helpful. But if you're using Lean Law, you might be using other software, but just make sure everybody's using the same software and the same stack and the same workflows so that there's no documents lost. You have some place to aggregate everything. That's the biggest part of it. You really have to look at. And then make sure that if you've got outside, you've got paralegals, you've got legal assistants, all these people, make sure that they're, like we did it with our firm, everybody has a computer from our firm. And then the computer also is locked down. So you've got security protocol in place. In the world we live in, I think it's going to just get more important as we go down the road. We use practice protect. We protect all the passwords. So if somebody decides they quit, I can turn that computer off and I can kill off the passwords for everything. So I'm protecting my clients' data. And above all else, they have to do the same for their clients. It's the same exact thing.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of our customers just using the Azure stack from Microsoft and having that centrally manage all of their logins. And so if an employee turns over, they shut it off there and it just propagates over to us, and we actually decommission that user from inside their account. And there's not, they don't even have to think about it. It's like, oh, well.
Right. And that's perfect, because can you imagine if you don't have that, what you have to do?
Yeah, you have to make.
That's the scary part.
I used to be in IT way back when, long time ago, when you had to turn off every account one by one. So you just had an inventory for every employee that said, here's all of the access you have to revoke. And typically when somebody was leaving the organization involuntarily, we would start that work a day beforehand, and they would start calling in with support tickets saying, hey, my access to this thing stopped working. We have to put it off. Yeah, I mean, I remember those days, and it's gotten to be so much cleaner with modern tools.
Yeah. Thank God, because that really is one of those things that you think about, because it could be, even as we even kind of work with the clients to talk about if there was a security breach or if there was a hack, how do you protect all the client data? How are you making sure that, because they have a duty to their clients the same as we do. We deal with a lot of numbers and financial data, so you have to make sure it's very secure. But thinking about it as a whole, even for their clients, they have to make sure that it's protected. And you can see sometimes with firms, they just kind of work very archaically, where, here's my drawer, I'm going to show you all my passwords. It's like, no, but you want to make sure that it's not, or it's taped to the side of the computer somewhere. Yeah. It's not a good practice.
Yeah, we still live in a world where password is the most common password, right?
Password 123.
Yeah, password 123 is exactly right. And I think that, when you talk about that move to distributed workforces, I guess, post COVID, did that just accelerate something that was happening anyway? What's the thought about that?
Well, with law firms, it was the kick in the butt that they needed, because it really wasn't happening. You had to really get them engaged. I can't tell you how many times I had a Zoom meeting and they didn't have a camera on. They had no way to, they had to call in, and that kind of accelerated some of the adoption there. Even with the courts, they didn't have that either. Now more things are. It's actually, in that respect, that part of the pandemic was a good thing. But I think too, you have to think about with workflow, if you have a support staff elsewhere. I mean, if they have small kids, it might not be the employee doing something, it could be their teenager. So you really have to make sure that their data is protected on your work computer. And it's things you don't think about that you want to think about ahead of time. And I think that's kind of our job when we consult with our clients. We start to bring up these topics and let them think about things technology-wise that they might not have. Even this year was one of the funniest, because sometimes clients want us to do the 1099s and some clients don't want us to do the 1099s. And what's fascinating this year was, thankfully, they changed the rule about if you're going to have to do it online. Most firms could not do that anymore. And I can't tell you, it's like, should I go to Staples to buy the box? No, you should not. And they're literally typing them in. I'm like, oh my God. So.
You can go to Staples and get the box, but you better only have 5 to do, because.
Exactly.
Yeah, that threshold
and
change.
They're like, why would they do that? Because it's necessary. I mean, that's just security. I mean, I've had the conversation about checks a million times. Attorneys love checks. They love to handwrite a check. And I try to explain to them, like, you're paying your bills. We encourage them. We use Relay Bank. We try to put a bank in place for payables, and we've got this beautiful system. Don't break that, because it's really to write a check and mail it, and they'll say, well, I don't want them to have my account number. What do you think is on your check? Your account number, your routing number, everything is there. So why not do it electronically? It's more secure. And hopefully that day will come too, where there won't be a lot of that either.
Yeah. I happen to live in Minnesota, home of deluxe checks. So it's one of the only places you can still buy groceries with the check.
Oh, wow. I hate being behind you in the line.
I don't claim to do it, but it is one of those things that there are some places where it's just part of the culture that, I mean, I've had people come to me and say, hey, I like being able to hand them a check because it's a personal connection thing. And although, because that digital transaction just doesn't quite feel the same. But as you mentioned, right, as you've seen generational shifts, they want their Venmo deposit. They do. They've never seen a check. My kids don't know how to write a check.
True. Actually, that's probably really true. They probably don't know how to write a check. They wouldn't know what to put because they don't have to.
Yeah.
It's just better. I don't know. It's just better, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think that when you talk about adoption, and you mentioned, like, you've got people who are, later career folks who are eagerly joining and learning things, or vice versa, people who are later career who'd say, hey, it always worked. Why do we need to change this? How do you talk about adoption inside of a firm and get them to look at changing their perspective on technology?
A lot of times we'll just give them some case studies, talk about, well, this happened, you probably read about this, but this was something that happened to a person that was on desktop, because sometimes they think desktop is safer. And I'll tell them it really is not, because the hacker can get in. And there was a dentist in Florida that happened to, where all the records, and so a local story, even better if I'm working with a client here.
Yeah.
But this happened where they hacked into his system. They hacked, and it was ransomware event.
Oh.
So, and I think he ended up paying the ransom, and I don't think he got his data back. So it was interesting. And that can lead down the road to conversations about insurance and all of that. But yeah, just talking about, I think the biggest selling point though is that they can log in from anywhere. If they want to be in Tahiti, they can log in and do their books. And sometimes that's just a foreign thought in their mind that they can really do this. And until they experience it, they really can't conceptualize it. And then they realize that, like, we had a client who's like, I'm in Mexico right now doing my books. And it's like, great, I'm glad to hear it. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I
good for
want to
you.
be in Mexico doing your books.
Yeah, we as a profession have adopted technology early, most of us, right? Because
we have, I'm proud of that.
Yeah, we absolutely should be. We really have. And there's no reason for us not to be looking at modern ways to interact with our business.
Yeah.
Going all the way back to Lotus 123, right?
Oh my God, that product. If anybody knows that and is of the age to remember it, it makes you cringe, because if you didn't save it, all your work is gone when you closed out of it. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, yes.
Awful. That's the thing I remember about that particular product was it just remember, like, I remember doing this massive spreadsheet I was working for a real estate company at the time that had all these different locations, and you had to type it in. And then I remember I finished at the end of it, like a Friday, and I clicked off, and it was gone.
Yeah, I more than once had to redo work for that reason.
It's not good.
Yeah, computer crashes. So power went out because there was no power supplies. We weren't running on laptops. We didn't have batteries. But yeah, that was definitely, you look at, but I mean, I guess going back, right, us as a profession, we automated off paper ledgers early. And we've been sort of leading that ever since. And then you as a firm advising people, right, how do you look at chart of accounts? How do you deal with, most of the folks who are on this, thankfully, have never seen a paper chart of accounts. But those used to exist. And that's the sort of thing that, we really are, is an opportunity where we're not just accounting.
Right. Oh, 100%. And we shouldn't place ourselves in a write-up kind of world where that's all we're doing is dumping bank feeds, because that job will get taken away by technology at some point. And I don't think that some point is that far down the road.
Yeah.
So, I can foresee in the short run, reconciliations, the transactions going in close to perfect, and then it reconciling itself. So there goes, if that's your whole job, if you sit and look at what you do and that's all you do, yeah, you got to start to think about where you can go to a place where it's a little more using your brain. And I think that that's the thing about specializing your firm is that if you can go down to a complex type of industry, whether it's nonprofit or law firms, physicians, I mean, those things require more of us. The bonus is, I started to look at my tech stack, and the thing about that was I could have my team learn one. I can remember trying to figure out each industry, what would be the best. And then having the team learn one, master one. So now that they're really good at the software. And then that kind of eases up in the workflow. And then once you get to that place, now I've got the time. The more you automate, you're going to open up some time to really analyzing the data. And I think that's one of the bigger polls for an attorney. They look at maybe the reports they got out of their PC law aren't that great, but when they move over to QuickBooks Clio or QuickBooks Lean Law, now they're sitting in a place where, look at the metrics I can get out of here. I've never had that, and that's typically how we get our firm to stay on after a migration. There's probably someone in the office that can handle putting the bank feeds in and all of that, but they start to work with us and they see that we can start to figure out, well, how can we make the firm more profitable, and what can we do? And because we see all these different firms from working with them, we can see what maybe works better at one firm and what maybe is not working and help them, which is a really benefit to having a firm, having someone hire a firm that does do this kind of work over, the generalist, which is something that I never really considered. And when I was looking at switching up, one of the things I was afraid I was going to be bored. I thought for sure I was going to get bored doing the same thing all the time. Am I going to be so sick of trust accounting? But trust accounting is like a Rubik's Cube. It's something that, what did I have? We had someone send us in a message that said, I have a rogue trust account. I'm like, oh, that's a great blog post title. I'm always looking at blog. How can I get catchy line? But I mean, it's true. And we got in to look at it and fixed it, but it's something to think about. I'm not bored because there's multiple practice areas. So even in any industry, you're going to find that there's places that you can even micro specialize in, and you'll still not be bored because it's so much to learn and talk about. I never thought, as I sit today, what I used to do years ago was a lot of just put my head down and typing in everything and putting it in the paper in the drawer and putting the paid bills. All of that's done. And now what I do today is more advisory consult. Sarah and I work with a lot of different firms, and we'll help them like somebody left the firm, they need to replace someone, and we'll look at who's in the firm and what they're doing. Is there redundancy in the workflow of the people, and help them try to figure out what to pay them. And all of that comes with this job that never had to think about any of that before. So it's really exciting, and you can learn it. It's not, if you're sitting back saying this is all I do have my head down and dumping bank feeds. You can get there. It takes time, but you can get there. And if you've got experience, to get there isn't as a heavy lift as you may think.
Yeah, and I think that you mentioned in passing a bit earlier about that mechanization of some of those those processes like reconciliation and things. If we adopt it first, if we go and we adopt the AI reconciliation tools and use them ourselves, it frees up our time. It's not putting. We have to think about it as a place where it's not putting us at risk. It's actually giving us an opportunity to do kind of stuff that you've done, and looking at how to really engage in a more close relationship with the businesses you're working in. So it's more fulfilling for you, and it's better for them simultaneously. I think it's really a great observation. And looking through the history of your business, I think there's a lot of opportunities for us in the community overall to say, hey, specialization isn't narrowing. Specialization is just getting deeper.
Yes. Oh, that is a great quote.
Yeah, I mean, those law firms aren't stopping changing. They're continuing to evolve. And, you get to be the point now, you get to you're trying to stay ahead of that evolution.
Yes.
So for those of us in the community, what's your big takeaway from your focus on law? And, is there a way for us to think about, how is it that you modernize your customers' business?
Yeah, I would say if you're going to take on the clients, take a look at what they're doing now. Don't try to change the world in one felt swoop, because it doesn't go well. A lot of times we'll come in and we'll see that they're doing maybe payroll in kind of an archaic way, but look at what would be the most beneficial to start, and we kind of work along that path of adding and then subtracting what's not working, and just talk to the client. And I think that's one of the benefits of having all this technology is we are able to have that conversation now that I think years ago you probably didn't even talk to them that much. Have that opportunity to talk to the client and find out what's working in their firm, what's not working, and then start to implement action items for them to get them down to the road so that maybe at the end of the year or 2 years they're sitting back, and then remind them what it was like when you first met with them and say, look where you've come to. Because it's good to give them that pat on the back, because it is a big undertaking when you change from something that's not really web-based or working well, and then get them there. And a lot of times it's just a matter of when you get them in the better technology, you are going to see that there's a lot of mistakes when it's manual, and there's a lot of redundant practices inside the firm. And you might be able to free up somebody. We freed up someone from a firm that they had to print whatever product they were using. They had to print all their billing because it didn't allow to send emails and print. You had to print everything. And they were flipping it over, cutting it up into pieces and making little pads out of the extra. And we came in and we were able to take away that. We put them in lien law. We got them working on the workflow. It was beautiful. It was even a practice to get them to really log in and know that they could only see their own, like each attorney could see their own customers. They didn't see the whole firm, which was nice. But the fact that we could free up, save the tree, save the paper, but also that person didn't have to cut it all up, and we were able to get them in a place where it was modern and seamless and really less printing. Then we adapted having the payment link, their cash flow improved. So there was so much benefit to that. And then that person that did all this work, that was a full-time job just managing this billing, her job shrunk in half. It was a big firm. Her job shrunk in half where she was able to do something. She was a paralegal. She didn't need to be doing what she was doing, but they were wasting her doing that because I don't know, it's the job she ended up with. So she ended up having more time to do something that was more for her brain to be able to do something more beneficial for the firm. So it ended up being a win for the firm for sure.
Well, that's great. I know we've only scratched the surface of the content of your book, and that obviously we can't go through the whole book in the course of a 30-minute podcast, but thank you, Linda, very much for your time. A reminder for everybody, look for Modernize Your Law Firm, Transform Your Law Firm for the Future by Linda Artesani. It's available on Amazon. And Linda, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you. I'll probably see you at Great Folks Connect.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for
Great.
having me.
Yeah, thank you very much.